Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and #Axios events. Over the next 30 minutes, I will be joined by my colleague, Russ Contreras. In this Axios Latino event, we will spotlight experiences from leaders in the Afro-Latino community, from the television screen to the halls of the U.S. Capitol. Our first guest is the representative from New York's 13th Congressional District, Congressman Adriano Espaillat, joining us from New York. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
So I want to talk a little bit about identity. You know, as a Mexican American, I've always felt that I'm of two worlds, and how I navigate that has changed that over time. But I'm curious if you can talk about your identity as a Black man and a Hispanic man, and how you've navigated that over your life.
Well, many people may feel that being Afro-Latino, it's sort of like a new dynamic, but in fact, it's not. We see throughout history how many Afro-Latinos have played a pivotal role in society, whether it is Arturo Schomburg of Puerto Rican descent. We have the Schomburg Center, which is sort of like the archive of these research hub of the African American and the African diaspora in Harlem and across the United States. Or you have someone like Carlos Cook of Dominican ancestry, who was sort of like the most important assistant to the great Marcus Garvey, and who really served to have an important role in the period between Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X. Or you have somebody like the great Roberto Clemente, who was a pioneer in baseball. These are all the important and historic figures of Afro-Latino descent that have played an important role in shaping our history. So being a Latino of African descent, an Afro-Latino, is not a new dynamic. It's one that's been very consistent with the history of our nation.
And what has it been like for you? I mean, you're from New York, but what was it like growing up? Did you feel like you had to identify with your Latino roots over your Black roots? Were those things cohesive? How did you feel around that?
I think that many people don't understand that race is not ethnicity. That you could be a Black Mexican, a Black Colombian. In Black, the Hondurans have the Garifuna community, which traces its roots back to Africa. They have their own language and their own customs. You know, you have Black Colombians, and you have in Latin America, you have a rich tradition of Black communities, and so race and ethnicity are totally two separate things. You could be from any ethnicity and be a Black man and a Black woman. So for me, it hasn't been so complicated. I've accepted my race and my ethnicity, and I try to enjoy both. I think I have the best of both worlds.
Wonderful. And kind of on that note, I wanted to ask about the Congressional Black Caucus, because I know that when you first joined Congress, you were interested in joining that caucus, and that hasn't happened. Can you talk about that and why you think it hasn't happened so far?
I really don't know, but what I can tell you is that I am persistent, and I will continue to knock on the door because I don't think someone else has the right to define my Blackness or to determine whether I am a Black man or not. I mean, I don't have to take a DNA test or go to ancestry.com to tell someone. Someone should not hold me to that standard. So I will continue to knock on the door. I'm not going to go away. All I'm asking is for them to give me a fair shot, and they have the right to vote me in or not. but I will be asking for that vote. And so I will not go away. There are other members of the Latino community, other members that came after me that have been accepted into the CBC. Maybe it's a political thing because I replaced a giant of a person in Charles B. Rangel from Harlem, but I am now the representative of Harlem for the last 6 years. And I deserve to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And I will continue to knock on that door.
Yeah. I guess you sort of answered this already, but I'm wondering what you think is behind this, knowing that there are 2 members in the caucus who are Afro-Latino and who are also in the Hispanic caucus.
Don't know what the motivation is, nor do I question. I know that I have a lot of friends in the Congressional Black Caucus who encourage me to continue to knock on the door, and that they share with me that that there is a growing sentiment to let me in. I get stopped by people in Harlem, and they yell at me, "Let him in." And when I ask them, "What are you talking about?" I said, "They got to let you in the congressional, but you represent Harlem and you're a black man." So I don't know if anybody has the right to say to me who I am. I know who I am. And my identity should not be defined by a political situation or regional situation. It is what it is.
Shifting gears a little bit, we know that there is longstanding historic anti-Black bias in a lot of Caribbean and Latin American communities. But we're starting, I think, to see a shift in terms of the way people think about this. After George Floyd, Latinos joined Black Americans in protests, and there seem to be just more conversations about this, about Afro-Latinos and their role in our society. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen shift people's attitudes toward Blackness and specifically Black Latinos?
I think there's a growing sense of awareness of who we are and the role that Latin American and Caribbean countries played, in the movement of Black people across the Americas. For example, in the Dominican Republic, you have a province of Samana, which was built by former U.S. slaves. You have a place, Villamella, in the capital, where you have a ritual of that comes directly from El Congo, or you have the very rich tradition of places like San Pedro Macorís. But as I said earlier, you have in Honduras and in Colombia, and you have in Venezuela, and of course in Brazil, very rich history. In far south as Peru, you have a very rich history, Costa Rica, and presence of Black Latinos of African descent. So people, I think, are more aware of this reality, and I think there's a growing and greater sensitivity to it, and something that we should celebrate. So Black History Month, to me, means that as well.
And before we wrap up, I wanted to get your take. How do we continue to push this conversation forward? How do we continue to raise awareness about this very topic?
We need to study the history, and we need to ensure that we highlight the positive aspects of Black people in the Americas. For example, Gregorio Luperón was a great general in the Dominican Republic who led us to the restoration from Spain. His brother mined the Mississippi River for the Union Army against the Confederates. And so we need to know these things. We need to celebrate them, and we need to tell the rest of the world of the great connections there are amongst the people of the Americas that have a very direct route to the African diaspora.
Wonderful. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And next, our video from our sponsor, Bank of America.
We help build a better future when we harness the power to develop new ideas. The power to demonstrate what we're made of. To be the role model our community needs. To be recognized for who we are and what we do. The power to have the same opportunities as everyone else. To break ceilings or to build bridges. To make things happen. To start something new. ¿Y tú? ¿Qué quieres lograr? What would you like the power to do?
I'm Russ Contreras, the race and justice reporter here at Axios. Our final guest is the creator of a new children's program, Alma's Way, and she's the esteemed actor from Sesame Street, Sonia Manzano. We all know her as Maria, coming at us from New York City. Sonia, it is great to be with you. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm doing fine.
Before we get into your current project and your work with Sesame Street, take us back to that opening scene in your memoir, Becoming Maria. You talk about how your mother and another woman are focusing on a young girl's hair, and they're talking about putting detergent in it. What were they trying to wash out, and what were they trying to do?
Well, the hair they were referring to was my older sister's hair. And she was a product of a former relationship that my mother had. And she had more, I guess, more Afro-Caribbean in her. And I remember neighbors talking about her hair and saying that it was frizzy and kinky. And they attributed it to the fact that somewhere down the line, someone had washed her hair with Fab detergent, and that's why it was frizzy. In retrospect, I understand that they were just trying to shy away from the fact that she had Afro-Puerto Rican roots in her by deciding that her hair was kinky because of detergent.
In the Bronx and El Barrio, the Afro-Latino experience is everywhere. Why is it that for many years we suppressed it? We didn't talk about it. We looked away from it. We were ashamed of it. And where are we now?
Well, obviously, because of the society that we live in. If you read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, she talks about this a lot. And people came to this country from Puerto Rico to the mainland and understood immediately the totem pole of power. And as people recognize that the darker you were, the lower you were on the totem pole of power, it was better to align yourself with as light-skinned people as possible. Now, that's an interesting conundrum for Puerto Ricans because we come in so many different shades, and all of those different shades exist in the same family. So I do remember as a kid, everybody kind of trying to deny their darkness and align themselves with the being light-skinned. I remember my mother saying, get out of the sun. You're getting too dark, and wondering why that was an issue. I remember Puerto Ricans that were as black as night, not referring to that or not wanting to accept that fact. And as a kid, you kind of observe all of these things and you put them in your file, and you don't try to look at it too closely. Now, as an adult, I can look at it too closely. We have come so far that we are accepting those Afro traits in us. And I think that Alma's Way is doing a very good job of celebrating that heritage.
And we'll talk about Alma's Way in just a moment. You then look toward television as a career. Growing up, you saw very few images of Puerto Rican. You saw very few images of Afro-Latinas. But what got you interested in acting, theater, and television?
I always loved television. I was the kind of kid that was raised in a household ruled by domestic violence, and I found relief and comfort watching wonderful stories on television. Of course, I looked at all of these people and I wondered where I was going to fit in. People would say, "What are you going to be when you grew up?" And you never knew what to say because you never saw anybody like you participating in society. So indeed, I wondered what I was going to contribute to a society that didn't see me. But it didn't take me away from not loving television and stories and humor.
Of course, your role in Maria, you taught us many generations, including myself, how to read, how to look at colors, identify shapes. And you were still, at that moment, one of the only Afro-Latinas on a major television show. What kind of reaction did you get when you started this production? What kind of reaction did you get throughout the years, especially in the 70s?
Well, first of all, let me tell you about my own insecurities coming into this show. I mean, the show was a product of the late 1960s. It was an outburst of the civil rights movement. And I remember being on the show and first wondering how I should wear my hair. Should I put rollers in it so it was smooth? Or should I leave it natural the way it is now? And it was a big problem as to, in my mind, I mean, they didn't censor me. I censored myself, wondering how I should represent myself. And they kept saying, just be yourself, just be yourself. So ultimately, I did end up just being myself. They really wanted a real person that kids in El Barrio could relate to. And once I understood that clearly, I stepped up to the plate. I didn't think too much about what my reaction was how people were going to react to me. I just saw that these people really wanted a natural person. And they threw the ball in my court and I ran with it. And I think being myself has taken me far.
Now, of course, you then looked at writing and won a plethora of awards for your writing. And now you are creating a new show, Alma's Way. Looking at some of the still images of this show, she looks very familiar. She lives in the Bronx. What type of character is she, and what can we expect to see from her?
Well, she's very much me as a little girl. I've put all of my kidness into Alma. She lives in the neighborhood, much like the neighborhood that I lived in when I was a kid, except we had to update it, of course, to make it current. Not my neighborhood in the late 50s that I grew up in. She's inquisitive. I remember finding refuge in my thinking, in my brain, in my mind. And when PBS asked me to create a show, Latinx-based show, I said, fine, but they let the mission be up to me. And I noticed that a lot of underserved kids, because they can't speak English or because they're in crowded classrooms or because they can't take tests or they can't memorize, we're thinking they're not as smart as they really are. And the point of this show is to tell kids that everybody has a brain, they have a mind, they could think, and they could think things through, and that the way they see the world is just as valid as the way anybody else sees the world. That was my prime goal in creating Alma's Way.
And not to give it away, but what does Alma think about her hair?
Alma loves her hair. She loves her friend's hair. We don't have any scenes about anybody talking about hair, but all of her friends are very racially diverse and very mixed. We wanted it to show a real neighborhood, the way the Bronx is today, through my personal point of view, of course. Alma's father is Afro-Puerto Rican, who was born in Puerto Rico, lived in Luisa Aldea, which is a Black community where plena and bomba comes from. There's a lot of that kind of music in the show, mainly because I loved that kind of music when I was a kid. And I never had been to Puerto Rico, and my parents would play it, and I was all eyes and big ears listening to bombas and plena and wondering where it came from.
In our final moments we have together, you write also in the opening scenes of Becoming Maria, this domestic violence that you saw as a young child, and it stayed with you for 7 decades. You also went into the homes of many children over those years, teaching us how to read, teaching us about our colors. But you were also saying, those who are going through things like I did, everything's going to be okay. How were you able to compartmentalize your experiences and still able to come into homes like mine or my family and tell us everything was okay?
I remember that when I was a kid, I found comfort watching television. So I never forgot that. And I always assumed that some kid watching television for comfort was out there watching Maria. And I thought the best way I could serve them was to completely be myself and be sincere and be truthful. And I think that has worked. I've gotten wonderful letters. I mean, I'm not going to be falsely modest. I've gotten wonderful letters of people saying, I lived in this crazy environment. But when I saw you, I knew that there was order in the world. I knew that there were kind people in the world that looked like me and that were in my community. So I think that not forgetting my own comfort that I was looking for when I watched television served me well on Sesame Street and will serve me well in Alma's Way.
Last 20 seconds. How did you keep your cool with Oscar the Grouch?
Oh my goodness, he's my favorite character because he's either 8 years old or he's 40 years old. And I always knew that we had to get along with people that we weren't crazy about in our neighborhoods. And he was a great character. I love Oscar the Grouch. He's my favorite. Everybody knows that that he is. As a matter of fact, I always kid saying I left Sesame Street because I waited long enough for me to ask. I waited long enough for him to ask me to marry him.
Sonia Manzano, on behalf of the millions of children who learn to read because of you, thank you so much. Good luck on Alma's Way.
Thank you.
And now we dive into our Why It Matters segment, where Astrid and I touch upon key takeaways from our interview. Astrid, one of the things that I was thinking about was we were planning this event. Axios Latino newsletter is only a year old. But yet we're here celebrating Black History Month. And a lot of folks really don't understand Afro-Latinidad. Why was it important for us to include Afro-Latino voices for our events to kick off this year here at Axios Latino?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Afro-Latinos have kind of been overlooked. I think the general public doesn't really have a great understanding of the fact that they don't really know how to separate race and ethnicity. And so people don't really understand that you can be Black, but also Latino. And so I really wanted to highlight these voices because I think they've been overlooked for a long time. And that was what, we came to when we decided to do our focus on Black History Month.
When I asked Sonia Manzano, who we all know as Maria from Sesame Street, just about some things growing up, what were the indicators that her community or family was pushing back on being Black and Latino? And she said a lot of it had to do with staying out of the sun, the texture of one's hair. They were ashamed of it. And I think that had to do with a lot of anti-Blackism that we have amongst Latinos. What did the Congressman say about how he identifies in multiple identities and how he tries to embrace his connection to the diaspora?
Yeah, I mean, he talked about how he just embraces his identity. He is who he is. He's always been that person. We briefly talked about the Congressional Black Caucus, which he has tried to join since he became a congressman since he took office in 2017. And he hasn't got an invitation. And he feels like, even though there's 2 other Afro-Latinos in that caucus who are also members of the Hispanic caucus, he feels like it's not up to anybody else to decide his Blackness. He feels like he defines who he is, not anybody else.
Well, what's interesting with Sonia, she's created a new cartoon after more than, 4 decades at Sesame Street, a new cartoon called Alma's Way. And this character is based loosely on her. It looks like her as a child, where she tells me Alma is going to be very proud of her hair. She's going to be very proud to be Afro-Latina. It's going to be a diverse setting. So there's really something interesting going on here. that Afro-Latino voices are coming forth. We see in the literature, and they're trying to create new cultural productions and television shows. I don't know if you've seen it, and what is your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it more often, like not to go to the more obvious choice, but, when In the Heights came out, there was a lot of uproar about, the lack of dark-skinned Afro-Latinos in the production that was set in an area with lots of dark-skinned Afro-Latinos. And so that, I think, even though there's been these movements for a long time all over the country, I think that really brought it to the forefront for a lot of people in like mainstream arenas. And so I'm starting to see those conversations shift. And I think that, you're starting to see that kind of show up in TV and media, but I think it's a slow progress too.
Yeah, and I can remember when Celia Cruz died, the famous salsera, they were carrying her coffin and casket across Fifth Avenue to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And one particular media company I was working for at the time, whom I will not mention, the managers there were surprised, like, who is this person? Why is there such a big crowd out there? It was like this question of, who is she, but who are they? It was like they couldn't fathom that this Black woman was a popular Cuban-American singer and had brought in audiences around the world. Do you find that too often, that people cannot sometimes compute that you can be Black and Latino at the same time, and that we have icons throughout our history?
For sure. I mean, I think, and I hope that that's changing, but I think for a long time, people just didn't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only that, but the influence is so there. I mean, listen to it in our music, listen to it in our literature. Even Selena, your favorite, had some Afro-Caribbean influences there. It seems like it transcends us across ethnic lines.
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of time left, but the congressman brought up a good point about understanding history. When you don't make those connections, it's because you don't know the past, and so I think that's a really big factor in why people miss this kind of connection.
Yes, and I agree, and hopefully we'll be able to do this every year for Axios Latino. Thanks for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more information or to sign up for the Axios Latino newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or go to our Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.